So, I analyze a lot of poetry, and I don't know if people ask me, like, how do you analyze poetry? But I do think about this, myself. Like, how does one actually go about analyzing a poem? And I figure I would just put the camera on and talk about it and just not edit this and whatever. And just see, what I can come to and think about with that. I analyze an immense amount of poetry. I do it for fun. I do it on here, online, and I do it for my friends. And it's a very fun thing to do. And I think that's really what it comes down for me, right? I think to answer a question of like, how do you analyze poetry? You need to talk about what analysis is and why you want to analyze a poem. And what I said there, I think, is the why. Is, it's fun. It's a fun thing to do. And that might be strange to some people because in a high school or I don't know about other place in the country, in the years of school when we are, from 14 to 18, maybe younger, maybe older, because college too. Sometimes they'll teach you about writing. I don't think they make it very fun. So it actually takes a lot of the fun out because these teachers tell you, there's symbols and there's metaphors in this, and you're supposed to see these and understand them and like also write a 10-page essay about it or something, which is just miserable. Like no one likes doing that. Uh, and so why is it fun? Right? Why should we do this thing, or why should we be convinced that it's an enjoyable thing to do? And I think the reality is the longer we spend with a work, the more time we spend diving into that thing, the more beautiful it becomes. Right? We can think about, our favorite songs, right? We'll listen to a song over and over again throughout our life, maybe years and years. And as we listen to it more, we know the words better. We uncover meanings, ways that we relate to that work through continued consumption. And that's sort of what analysis to me is. It's to consume a work, but with this intent to understand it in that way, to bring this work to a point where you can feel like you are really, it's part of you, to open oneself up to it or to let it in. And when we do that, right, that doesn't necessarily sound fun, but when we do that, we allow something beautiful to happen. Whatever emotions are happening in that poem, whether it is grief or joy or humor, right, those become closer to us. We get to feel them more deeply. And that's what happens, right, as we listen to a song again and again. Those emotions really become, ours. We connect to them in a way. And I guess for me that's fun, right? It's fun for me to live my life as vividly as possible and to really engage with art on that level. If that doesn't sound fun to you, then this is not for you. If you think about reading as some way to gain knowledge or to, learn about history or to get smarter, uh, then, that's not really what I'm going to talk about. Though I think those things can happen when we read something closely. is we can get smarter and we can learn things. I just don't think that's what we want to set out to do. Um, Nor are we setting out to read or to consume art with the interest of like writing an essay about it that's going to get a good grade, make you seem smart or something. Not my thing. I care about feeling and living. So, with that why, we also sort of answer the what of analysis. Why we do this thing and what it is. Well, because we want to feel things as deeply as possible. So, what we're going to do when we analyze is approach a work in a mindset to feel those things that it proposes deeply, intentionally, fully, right? To give this piece of art a chance. So, right, how do we do that? This is very abstract, the thing that I'm trying to say. And at this point, you might not be surprised that for me, analysis doesn't look like mapping out a rhyme scheme. It doesn't look like scanning the verse and being able to say that a work is iambic pentameter or that this is an ode or a villanelle or some form. I know these things, and they can be useful knowledge. I don't think knowing these things gives us really a deeper emotional relationship with a piece of art. What gives us that relationship, right, is that time and that repeated consumption and that digging into a work. So the first thing and the most important thing in analyzing a poem, to me, is to read it. Right? We have to consume the entire thing. And I think, oftentimes, well, pretty much any time that I am analyzing a work, I am writing all over, right? Scribbling, taking notes, writing things down, drawing arrows, and it looks quite chaotic and maybe artistic if you are of a similar mind to me. Let me find an example. Right, we're drawing in all sorts of colors and drawing lines and trying to break this thing down. But before we do any of that, and not everyone has to do that. Not everyone likes colored pens. Before we do that, we have to read. And I think, it gives us that zoomed out, just felt experience of the poem, right? If we're trying to feel this thing as deeply as possible, we owe it to ourselves to let our first impression of the work be sort of honest and unconceived and open. That's very hard, I think. It's hard because someone will recommend us a poet and they'll tell us to expect a certain thing of them. Or we will have some, cultural understanding of the era from which this person wrote, maybe. Or a preconception about a genre if we're listening to a song. And those things tend to get in the way of our sort of honest understanding of the individual works. If someone hates country music and you recommend them a country song, they're more likely to just discard it or half listen. So we start by reading with an open mind. How to cultivate something like this, I'm not sure. I think by practice. I think by trying to not be too judgmental of things. But that's a step one. And I think this step one can be repeated again and again, just reading something, just appreciating it. And that's almost the purest form of analysis, right? Like listening to a song again and again. But I think we are able to kind of shortcut the process in a way by, rather than just experiencing the work passively, consuming, we can turn our experience of a work into a conversation. So you read the work once or twice, and you might start to ask questions. Any sort of questions. And that's a vague term, questions. I think a question is also noticing something that piques your interest in the poem, right? A particular line that sticks out to you. And whenever we notice something, we can sort of attach a question to it. Why do I notice this? What do I like about it? Is this thing sticking out to me because I don't like it? Why don't I like it? And when we do that, when we start asking questions, noticing things, what we're going to do as humans, as minds, is seeking answers. Because we love that. We love having answers for our questions. And then you have to try to find those. This line seems really important to the poem. Why? I suspect that you'll find the answer to a question like that somewhere else in the poem. And so by constructing and connecting relationships between parts of things, we'll start to uncover details about a work. I'm saying this all very abstractly because I think it is a very unspecific process. I don't really think that anyone telling you that there is a set way to analyze a work, to understand it, to come to its truth. I think anyone saying that is lying, basically, because everyone is different. We're all different perceivers. So then you be open and you follow your interest. You follow that intuitive path through the work, the things you notice, the questions you ask. And you just have a conversation, right? Dialogue, engage, question, answer, compare, put yourself into it, put it into you. This is where I think that two things help. One is speaking the poem out loud, and one is writing on the page, if you can. If there is a page. Speaking, because it brings it back to something tactile, right? It takes this big world of emotions and vagueness and places it within you. We also happen to notice, I think, certain things about a poem when we speak it. Things like pacing, things like tension and energy, things like tone. Speaking the poem demands us to sort of perform the poem. I'll come back to that idea in a second. It's an important one. And then writing, right? When we write on something, we have to sort of solidify our ideas. I love to write in pen, in my books, on poems, because it is permanent. Because you are committing to putting an interpretation on the page. Erasing is for, people who are scared, I guess. And so we start to draw lines and draw connections and underline things that are interesting and scribble notes in the side of whatever comes into our mind. And we keep doing that. And that could look different for everyone. I do think putting it down in some way, you can write it on a separate page, writing it on the poem, in colors, not in colors, a document. I think writing is helpful. That being said, some people might do better without it. So that's not even a rule. Try not to give rules. It's a very unspecific guide. Maybe I've been trying to think of like a title when I post this. An unspecific guide to poetry analysis. Kind of long. Kind of wordy. It'll be something like that. So speaking. I said I was going to come back to that. When we speak a poem, what we're doing is putting another person's words in our mouth. It almost sounds kind of vulgar. Certainly intimate. Because poetry are it's these words that are poured out with so much meaning and so much intent and so much soul. And when we read it out loud, we have a couple options. One is to read it monotone and give their words nothing. And I think that's boring. I think you'll find yourself reading out loud and boring yourself by reading with plain language, by not giving inflection, by not performing the piece. And if you do give it energy, you'll also find that as you do, there is tension and there is release in the poem. There are things that should push, there are things that should pull. This all takes practice, just doing it again and again. It's intuitive. I'm an intuitive person. But we find, right, the push and the pull and the energy, and we create that art again. We bring life back to those words. And I think another way to describe analysis, I've talked about it as dialogue, as diving in, as openness. Another way to see it is performing the work back to yourself. Because in performance, you're trying to create something as beautiful as possible for your audience. And like I said, with our intention of this, right, we're trying to pull out as much emotion, as much beauty as we can. And so to perform naturally kind of helps us with that pursuit. It allows us to focus on giving this work as much life and beauty as we can. That's also where you start to notice things, the poetic devices, the rhymes, the alliteration, the assonance and consonance and anaphora and structures and repetition, jargon, right? Is you'll notice, right, as you speak the poem out, certain words want to sit in a certain way. Some want to flow into each other. Sometimes the rhymes punctuate. Sometimes they push. Sometimes the assonance flows, and sometimes it becomes staccato-like. I'm a musician. I have to use the musical terms. And when we do this, not only are we honoring, our own desire for beauty, but we're honoring the art and the artist. Right? Some people say, the author is dead. That goes back to an essay called The Death of the Author, which is a great read. And that you can entirely separate yourself from, the artist and just look at the text itself. But I think you miss out on something when you don't sort of cherish that this is a work created by a person, someone with emotion, someone with intent. Not that I think it's very useful to, find their intent. Poetry is a very imprecise way of communicating things to each other. But the artist was there. Nor do I revere the artist. Nor do I think the work is sacred. I write on poetry books. I mean, I guess I think of that as a good thing. but art is just an object as well. That's contradictory, I know. Um, find lots of contradictions with poems, I guess. um, so yeah, we open ourselves and we perform. And in that we create a dialogue. We consume and we take in the things that are being said by the author, and then we speak life back into them. And so it forms this sort of like inhaling and exhaling of art, of meaning, of words, of thought. And I think that's a thing that's deeply satisfying, enjoyable, emotional, fun, empathetic. Right? It gives a lot. And that is not something that I've ever heard someone teach. I'm not sure it's something that I hear other people say, really. This sort of idea of the art consumption as an art making, this participatory process of me and you. And I don't think it's something that can be taught. That's why I can't give rules. That's why I can't give, you know, that's why I don't even really have like a much justification or reason to justify like why you should listen to me. I mean, I write a lot, I read a lot. These are the things I've come to. I want to share them. But, I don't work for a literary journal. And that doesn't matter. That wouldn't matter for the appreciation of art. You can shoot me for that one or whatever. Yeah, it's something of the self, of a discovery. It's a coming to being alongside another thing, and it takes a long time to like get there, to have this sort of relationship with art. But it's a very fulfilling thing. And I guess all I can say is like try it. I don't know, trust me, take my word for it. and it's about discovery, and it's about wonder. And if at every stage of consuming poetry or any art we can remember that it's this wonderful thing, and that we have so much to sort of be grateful for. The words of others, the ideas of others shared with us, and that we like participate in that in turn, then I think it can be fun. And it can be incredible and fulfilling, and it doesn't have to be anything with rules. Maybe this should be at the start, but there's no wrong poetry to read. There's no wrong art to consume. As long as you're reading something that you feel gives you that dialogue, right? That you feel you can have a relationship and open yourself up to. Because, the reality is some art feels hostile to us. We don't want to open ourselves up to it. Some feels natural. Some feels like you read it and it's a friend talking to you. Follow those things, right? Follow the art that you want to talk to, that you feel you can participate in as an active member of the experience. That sort of maybe foreshadows my whole opinion on, reading classic art or contemporary art or high art or low art, that it's a personal choice. But that's a whole other conversation. uh, yeah. But maybe as part of that analytic thing, that idea of openness, it can also be good to open yourself up to as much art as possible, to try new things, right? It's like eating food. Start with safe foods, start with things that taste good, or dive in and try some strange, spicy, foreign something made of something. You don't know. uh, but either way, our taste and our palate grows. And I think we find ourselves more able to appreciate more different things, until we can get to a point where we can find the good flavors in everything. That's my goal with analysis, is to be able to appreciate the beauty in all art, right? And people will discard like insta poetry, or they'll say not to read something from a dead white man. And that just feels very closed off to me. That just feels like limiting your own experience as a person. And so we read all of these things not with a spirit of critique, not with a spirit of wanting to change or impose, not arguing with the work, but to make it more beautiful, to lift it up alongside with us, to appreciate as deeply as possible. And then everyone wins. At least in that small way. I don't understand people who suffer through art, who participate in something they are not enjoying, or to make themselves suffer, right? Usually we don't like things. Usually our dislike of something is a choice. I think I've said something contradictory in there again. It makes sense to me. It makes sense from this side. Anyway, that's enough for now. That's enough to maybe make someone think, to reframe. In an ideal world, give someone an epiphany against all the things they were drilled into by their high school English teacher. Yeah, just love it. Participate, talk to the art, converse, perform, engage. It's a living thing, and it's a process, like us. Because art, they are these slivers of us that we leave. So we can treat them like that. And that feels really good.